everyone. I'm so sorry we're late, guys. We tried to put a note on the holder screen. I hope you guys saw that. There's so many of you there, and I really appreciate you being for the session. I am genuinely sorry for being late. We were just trying so hard with the OCR session that went before. We just overran slightly. No rudeness or snubbingness intended for you guys. Okay, very quick reminders to you. Obviously, we're here for AQA A-Level Paper 2. Couple of things. First of all, you need the notes pages while we're taking this session, guys. Do have them and do complete them. Digital pen, real pen, whatever. It doesn't make a difference. Hard copy, whatever. You do whatever you want, but use the notes. I'm going to try really hard here to take knowledge and transfer it into exam skill. All this thing about exam technique, I think it's a load of... because really it's about knowing the stuff and knowing what's expected and the format of what you're going to put down. If we get that, I don't think there's such a thing as exam technique. We just demystify that. That's the aim of the session in many ways. We're going to cover a large number of topics here, guys. We are going to go the full hour and a half there or thereabouts, which means you're probably going to slightly over, and I apologise for that. Hopefully you're not missing anything good on the TV or equivalent. If I could ask a massive favour, folks, if you could be so kind as to offer a like onto the YouTube stream and a subscribe onto the channel. We're really close to 15,000 subscribers, so maybe even you lot could get us over the line. Who the hell knows? We've been aiming for that for this revision, and I think we're about 80 short or something like that. So it'd be brilliant if you could get us there. I should have sorted out some kind of prize. I ain't got one. Here, whoever is that 15,000 gets this stapler. No? Or I'm very proud to have used up both an orange and a green pen. You can have two empty cases pens. There you go. Now then, Marta's here to answer questions. The questions are available in the chat sort of window in the bottom right of the hub page. Chat to us there. And finally, guys, as I change the stream from here to the canvas, I am changing microphone, so you might have to just adjust volume. March, have I forgotten anything before we get these guys into it?
No, I don't think so.
Are you happy, yeah?
Yep.
We've got lots of these lovely AQA people. Guys, this is always the twitchy moment for me. Let me make sure I line this up properly. It's been... Here we go. So thank you, guys. Let's get cracking. We're starting with a little bit of applied physiology. Here we go. Okay, my little AQA A-Level Cherries Paper 2. Thank you to all of you that watch Paper 1 session, by the way. There's loads of you. Really appreciate that. Now, a couple of things, folks. I just want to remind you what big job for us today is to take knowledge and to convert it into skills, exam skills. That's what I want to try and do in this session. And with that in mind, guys, I really emphasize that you should follow this session along with the notes pages which are designed to be taken with it. So they're in the description, print them off, use them on your tablet, whatever. The infographics will tell you all about what your exam paper is structured like. Get it in your life and become familiar. And finally, the national mock exam is something that you should be looking at. It's something that you should be attempting, marking, and you should also be learning those model answers. We write them for you. I'm telling you, the best performing students this year that perform in the top 10% and get those amazing results, they are going to have learned those model answers. So if you want to be that, go do it. We design those papers on the specific demands and requirements of the AQA paper, and we write model answers that really resource you. Anyway, I'll stop banging on about it, get them learned. Okay, this is what we're covering. We've got 10 topics to do, guys. Some of them are absolute biggies, so we'll fly through it, hopefully, but it's going to be the majority of our time. Now, topic 1, dietary supplements and manipulation. First things first, I'm just going to make this a bit bigger so we've got a little bit more view. I've included here 4 methods or substances which you can use, well, one can use, for supplementing one's diet. Now, what I want to do here is I want to get into how we'd write about it. So can I just make a point? I'm going to assume that you can learn that glycogen loading is a 7-day process. On day 1 we deplete, on day 2 and 3 we increase fat and protein, and day 4 we deplete through training again, and day 5 and 7 we get lots of carbs into the diet, and we combine that with tapering, bringing down training load, and we can get up to 50% greater storage, mostly in the liver actually. And I'm also assuming that from that kind of table there, you can also say, well, look, this here is a strength of that model. This is an advantage. This is an advantage. But hang on a second, there are disadvantages to this model. We might go into hypoglycemia and depletion. We might feel tired and irritable. We might retain water and be bloated. And we might have stomach pains. Can you see just by my kind of indication of those circles on the screen? What have we got there? We have got an evaluation. That's really the purpose of that table. Now, the one I want to go over with a little bit of detail is bicarbonate, because it's something that students I think get a bit confused about. So this one I just want to air quotes teach. The others I'm going to assume that you can just go through it and understand what it's all about. So can I just be clear? Sodium bicarbonate is an alkali structure, and this is its formula, and what we're finding is that it binds with hydrogen ions. So I just want to be clear, when we produce lactic acid from the glycolytic system or the lactic acid system, that breaks down into 2 products. It breaks down into lactate, which we can reuse, restore, use for energy, or it breaks down into hydrogen ions. Hydrogen ions. And it's these little fellas that are the fatiguing, acidity forming, denaturing of enzyme type products. And what we can do is if we've got HOCO3, which by the way we produce naturally, but we're taking more of it here, what we do is we combine HCO3 with hydrogen, and I'm not going to get into this, but it forms carbonic acid. Now, I could teach this to you chemically, but we'll just do it simply here. It forms carbonic acid, and as soon as carbonic acid is formed, this is what happens. It splits into H2O, and it splits into, that was meant to be bigger, CO2. What do we do with this and this? We breathe them out as water vapor and CO2 to breathe out at the lung through diffusion at the alveoli. Okay, so we have got the fact that hydrogen ions, which are the fatiguing element of lactic acid, combine with our bicarbonate, form carbonic, and then break down into a breathable, outable structure, which is not this fatiguing thing. Okay, it's not this sort of structure. So in other words, what that allows us to do is to buffer. The best thing I would tell you about this system is, unlike the sort of the slow component of VPOC, which of course happens after exercise or reduction of intensity, this happens during exercise. So you can be what we call mopping up and buffering lactic acid away, hydrogen ions, during performance. And that's why that one's really important as a strength. It delays obla. Make sure you can form this. It delays obla to an increased intensity. So we can work at higher intensity aerobically. However, there are some issues. It's unpleasant. It gives you a tummy ache because it's alkaline. It makes you poo. It makes you sick, and it hurts your belly. Now, obviously, put the nice words into your answer, but those are key factors for me. Now, what I want to do here is I want to get into the practice of what we're going to do. This here was from when we did revision in 2020. That's available on YouTube, by the way, if you want to go and do it. We put this question in. Analyse the benefits of glycogen loading and sodium bicarbonate for a 3,000 metre runner. So I just want to be clear here, guys. We're analysing, so we're breaking down and explaining just the benefits of both of these for this performer. So I've got to break them, talk about one, then talk about the other, and explain the benefits. I'm going to get no credit here for negatives. I'm only going to get it for those greens that I've got up there. So let's see if we can do it. I'm going to say, I'm doing this quite quick, so go with me on it. Glycogen loading, I'm going to do that one first. Glycogen loading can cause, going straight into benefits, can cause up to a 50% increase. And I've not been asked to describe the process, have I? I've been asked to analyse the benefits. So I'm talking straight away about benefits. Up to a 50% increase in glycogen stores. And again, we could say mostly in the liver there if you wanted to, but I'm going to just carry on. In glycogen stores, which means it takes the runner, the 3,000 metre runner, longer to reach exhaustion. Now that could be really important in things like training environments, but it's taking longer to reach exhaustion. So this person can keep going. But I just didn't mean to put full stop there. But also be able to work, maybe in the race, at higher intensities aerobically, intensity aerobically. And I'll just drag down. This leads to greater stamina-based performance in steeplechase. I'm assuming this person's a steeplechaser. It may be that they're just doing 3,000 metres, but I'm going to assume they're a 3,000 metre steeplechaser in steeplechase. Now, that's my first analysis. I've taken glycogen loading. I haven't touched bicarbonate yet. I'm just doing that. So what am I going to do next? I'm going to switch to blue just to emphasise the difference. And this, let's choose that blue. And this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to go the following. I'm going to say sodium, I'll even go separate paragraph, sodium bicarbonate, literally a separate answer here. Sodium bicarbonate increases, only talking about benefits, not talking about sickness and vomiting and pooing, increases the body's buffering capacity. That's, buffering the lactic acid away. Buffering capacity. That's obviously, as I said, trying to move my notes and they're not moving, and allows obla to be reached, let's actually say to be delayed until a greater intensity of running, which means obviously they're running faster or jumping the hurdles. So my runner can now run at higher intensities aerobically. Run at high, and I'll put here, so can run at higher pace. So it can run at higher pace without fatigue. Now, there, can you see that I've clearly analysed both of those methodologies? I've clearly analysed both of them. And now I'm going to put in a little conclusion. I'll put my little conclusion in green. By the way, technically speaking, an analysed question doesn't necessarily need a conclusion. I just think it's good practice, so I'm going to put mine in. I'm going to say here, both methods allow for a greater pace. And I'm just summarising here. They both allow for a greater pace. Attack of jumps, obviously if it's a steeple chaser, attack of jumps, including the water jump, we could say here, attack of jumps and likely quicker finish time. So, should this person use these methods? Well, yeah, they should. But what we haven't done is looked at the drawbacks. Now, I'm going to come to that in a second. Now, by the way, I could go further here and say which one I prefer for this particular athlete. Maybe I would say I like the bicarbonate more because it can be done shortly. It's not a 7-day process, it can be done shortly before the event. But this is where I want to get things or make things interesting. What happens now if that is not an analyse question but an evaluate question? And I want to be clear here, guys. I'm not going to write this out, don't worry. But this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to form the following answer. Paragraph 1, I'm just going to say para 1. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do strengths and weaknesses of glycogen loading. That's what my first paragraph from the table above is going to be. My paragraph 2, guess what it's going to be? My paragraph 2 is going to be strengths and weaknesses of sodium bicarbonate. Shouldn't have written that out. Carbonate, HCO3, sorry. Sodium bicarbonate. And my paragraph 3 is what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say here a conclusion, and in that conclusion I'm going to do a summary of which is better. So maybe, as I said before, I'm going to choose sodium bicarbonate as the most relevant one of which is better for this particular athlete. So can you see how analysing benefits is just giving those, right, and breaking into parts. But this time I'm still breaking into parts. Paragraph 1, strengths and weaknesses of glycogen loading. Paragraph 2, strengths and weaknesses of bicarbonate. Paragraph 3, conclusion. Now, there's no reason why you couldn't do paragraph 1 as the strengths of both, and then paragraph 2 as the weakness of both. That's absolutely fine. But I like to go, hey, a strength is, whereas a weakness is. That's how I personally like to write, so that's how I would do it. Okay, lovely. Let's scroll down to here. Okay, a couple of things I want to get across first of all, guys. You need to be aware of those equations and those units. Get them in your lives. I'm going to talk through all of these with the exception of angular acceleration in this session. So I won't go over them here because they're going to come through. I think the definitions are really important. Can you define angular momentum, quantity of rotation of body possessions? Can you define angular velocity, rate of rotational moment around an axis of rotation? Can you define angular acceleration, change of rate of angular velocity? And obviously we've got our equations there. Now, the point I want to make is we've got a symbol here of an eccentric force. So we've got an eccentric force here, folks, quite clearly. Why do we know? It's away from centre of mass. Okay, so we know that's an eccentric force because it's away. So what's going to happen here? Well, the force is going to be applied here. Maybe this is a brushing up the back of the ball. The ball is travelling in this direction of motion. So what's this ball going to do? It is going to rotate in that way. In other words, we are going to produce topspin. Now, I'm not going to go into Magnus forces. That's for another day. I did cover that in previous sessions if you want to get back into 2023, 2022, and you want to cover that, by the way. But we now have topspin. Now, what I want you to also consider is that we have other names for that eccentric force. That eccentric force has other names. And I just want you to be clear because I'm going to use them in a few moments' time. So we could take the word eccentric That's fine. And really, if we were to define that, we would say that the eccentric force is the same as what we refer to as a torque. And we're going to use that knowledge in a second. Now, I want to be clear what a torque is. A torque is the force multiplied by the perpendicular distance from the axis. So if you think about an axis of rotation, if you think about an eccentric force, look, we've got the force being applied away from the axis of rotation, and there is a distance between those. That is that perpendicular distance, and that we could therefore calculate torque. Now, the other thing I just want you to be aware of is a torque is also called a moment. Now, I'm not mentioning that because I'm saying you should write it in your exam. I'm mentioning that because that word's about to come out of my gob, because it comes out of me sort of naturally, because these are all interchangeable in my mind. So I just want you to be aware, if you hear the word moment from me, it is the same as a torque, which is the same as an eccentric force, all of which are the force applied multiplied by the distance that force applied from the axis of rotation. And that is what we're talking about. Anyone sip me coffee? Nice. Okay, now this is where life gets a little bit interesting. Let's just drag down. We have 3 analogues of Newton's laws, and they're all there. You can learn them and start applying them. Let's just go through this. A rotating body will continue in a state of constant angular momentum. We know that angular momentum, the amount of rotation possessed by a body, until acted on by an external torque. We now know that that torque is made up of both a force and how far that force is applied away from the axis. So both of those things can be manipulated. So, for example, a body in flight will rotate with constant angular momentum until landing or an external torque. So my tennis ball, which was top spinning, will continue with a rate of constant angular momentum until it hits the ground, or the opponent hits it with the racket if it's a volley or whatever. Also, there's a little mistake in this one. A body on ice will rotate with constant angular momentum. Note it there, constant angular momentum, until we say landing. I think a better way of putting this is applying the skate. You know, if you think about a skater spinning, what they do is they spin, and then when they're ready to stop, they will apply the skate to finish it off. Okay, that's that external torque. It's a force applied away from the axis there, perpendicular. Now, Newton's second analogue is a carbon copy of Newton's second law. But of course, rather than talking about motion and acceleration, we're talking about angular motion and angular acceleration. The rate at which the object changes its angular velocity, which is of course angular acceleration, is directly proportional to the size of the torque acting. So the greater the torque, the greater the angular acceleration. It could be deceleration, by the way. And it takes place in the direction. And I want to remind you, there are only 2 directions for rotation. There's not left and right, up and down, backwards and forwards. No, there's clockwise. And if you're like me and you're from the UK, there is anti-clockwise. Saying counterclockwise is absolutely fine. I will just judge you on a personal level. So there we go. We've got anti-clockwise. Now, Newton's third law, I always find this is the one that students find hardest to kind of picture and understand. And it's for every rotational action, there is an equal and opposite rotational action. And I think a nice way of saying this is, think about a trampolinist who's they're jumping here, and they've brought their legs. There's their legs there. They've brought their legs up, and they've rotated at the hip, and they've flexed at the hip to bring their legs up. Have you noticed how their arms come down and they go in the opposite direction? So we've got the legs moving anti-clockwise, and we've got the arms moving clockwise. We've got this equal and opposite rotational action. Think about, I don't know, a rugby conversion or penalty kicker who sort of kicks off their right foot and their leg swings across to the left. If you notice that arms go from left to right, it counterbalances. That's what we see. Okay, now before we really get into the weeds of this, I want to remind you of the 3 primary axes. And I use the word primary very deliberately. This here is the sagittal axis. Sagittal. So of course, if we were to rotate this axis in either direction, this person would perform a cartwheel, a diving save, this kind of thing, right? This one here is what we call the frontal axis. If we were to rotate this, let's say in this direction here, what would happen here? This person would do a back somersault, a backward roll. If it was the other direction, in this case it would be clockwise, they would be doing a forward roll, a front somersault, a duck jump. etc. And this one here, we can call it the vertical axis, but this is the longitudinal axis. And think about people who are changing direction, pivoting, a skier turning a slalom gate. If we rotate around this axis, the body will effectively change its direction of where it's facing. By the way, these mannequins are all in what we call the anatomical standing position. They're not performing movements, but obviously real people can. Can I just mention as well, all of these axes are what we call the primary axis. Can I just stress to you, if we take the frontal, for example, can you just notice there's also a frontal here, and here, and here, and here, and here, and here. We just represent it as the primary one. When we abduct and adduct the shoulder, can you see how there's a sagittal axis through the shoulder there? Okay, can you see that? So just want you to be aware of that concept. Okay, super quick pause there. So let's think about angular momentum. And we pretty much already know this from Newton's first analogue, that a rotating body will continue in a state of constant angular momentum until a torque acts or a moment acts. Okay, so I want to just zoom in. I just want to show you this graph in a little bit more detail, and then we're going to do a bit of writing around this, because ultimately that's what we're going to be assessed by. So what we're saying here is that this moment here is the point at which, let's say, a high diver, their toes leave the ground. That's happening here. So toes leave, let's call it the platform, 10-meter platform for argument's sake. Okay, so that's that moment there. That's what's happening here. Okay, now what we can see here is that throughout that next apparently 5 seconds, it wouldn't be as long as that, angular momentum remains completely constant. We know that, constant angular momentum, perfect. However, the constructs of angular momentum change. Why? Because angular momentum, folks, angular momentum is made up of, let's get this right, angular velocity, which of course we've defined earlier, multiplied by moment of inertia. Now, I want you to think about this a second. I'll make sure you know what these things are in a moment. But if this is a constant, it doesn't change once the toes have left the ground or the platform. The thing is, if this was to go up, by definition, this would have to go down, right? Because this is constant. Whereas if this went up, if this went down, this would have to go up to maintain that constant. And that's exactly what we see. Now, I'll talk you through a specific answer to this, but I just want to talk you through on the graph before we do that. So let me tell you something here. What's happening here is that at this point, the moment of inertia of this individual, just as they leave the board, is very high. How are they doing that? They're stretching their arms above their head. They're going on their tiptoes, and toes leave the platform. Because what is moment inertia? If this person, our diver, is rotating around their sagittal side to side, sagittal, what am I talking about? Frontal side to side axis. Sorry, the reason I say that is different exam boards call them different things. Anyway, our frontal axis. What that means is if they stretch that at the hip, obviously, if they stretch their arms above their head, they are increasing moment of inertia. Look, high moment of inertia. That means that their velocity, angular velocity, is low. But as they go into it, what's going to happen here is they start to tuck. They bring their mass, their arms, their knees close to the central axis, the frontal axis. And look what happens. Angular velocity shoots up and moment of inertia decreases. But when they want to control the entry, they're going to straighten out. They're going to increase moment of inertia, and they're going to slow down that angular velocity. So in other words, they're not rotating much as they hit the water. And what I'm going to do here, just got to change canvas board. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to talk you through how to write about that. Okay, one second. What a pose, what a photo, what a face this guy is making. First of all, this person is rotating around this axis of the hip. And of course, we know that as the frontal axis. Let me just write that. We mentioned that just a moment ago. Okay, so this particular moment is in flight, but we've got two other stages here. What do they do prior to takeoff? Well, this person, what they will do is they will lean forward. That is actually creating a torque. They will stretch arms up, so get their hands above their head. They will point toes, and what they will do is they will have maximal moment of inertia, which is the spread of mass in relation to the axis of rotation. In other words, unlike the tuck position now, they're going to be really stretched out. What is the impact of that? That means they have high moment of inertia because they've got everything spread away from the axis. And what that's going to mean is low angular velocity. So in other words, when they take off, they're going to have really high moment of inertia, but they're going to be rotating slowly. When they want to start rotating quickly, what do they do? Let me just make this a little bit bigger. What are they going to do? Well, quite obviously what they're going to do, and I'll come back to this point in a second, what they're going to do here is now they're going to tuck. They're going to bring their mass, look at this, their mass close to this axis. And what that's going to mean is that if the tighter they tuck, that if they tuck tightly, what that's going to do is it's going to reduce moment of inertia and it's going to increase angular velocity. In other words, during the actual flight, they're going to rotate really quickly, high angular velocity. Now, can I just make a point to you? The reason why we needed high moment of inertia takeoff is that this dictates the potential angular velocity. You need to get moment of inertia as high as possible at the exit point so that you can get angular velocity, moment of inertia high at the exit point so you can get angular velocity as high as possible during the flight. And then prior to entry, what's this person going to do? They're going to straighten out. You've probably seen this in diving competitions with Tom Daly or whoever. They're going to straighten out and they're going to increase moment of inertia by stretching their arms, pointing their toes again. Why? They want a slower rotation. Why? They want control. Now, this example we've got below is identical, but the difference here is this person they're actually spinning in the air. And can I just stress, this is a jump and a spin. Can I just, this could be a Salchoa work, I'm never sure about my ice skating moves, but can I stress that if this person was just spinning on the ice, we consider the friction created by the ice to be negligible, and therefore it's conserved angular momentum, okay? But what are they going to do? Before they spin, before they take off, what are they going to do? They're going to spread arms. Why are they going to spread arms out? You know, when this person takes off, arms are going to be here, legs are going to be wider. Why? Because they're rotating around the longitudinal axis. So if they spread arms out, what do? Increase moment of inertia, fantastic, at release, and that gives them that high potential angular velocity. What are they going to do during flight? Exactly what we see now. They're going to fold arms. They're going to, look, you see they've got crossed legs. You know, they literally can't bring their mass any close to that longitudinal axis. They cross legs, and this decreases moment of inertia. That therefore increases angular velocity, okay? And also, by the way, it makes this look beautiful. It's where we see the aesthetic in this performance. We notice that because this correctness leads to the beauty of the movement. And when they come to not so much entry, but stopping, okay, or landing, let's say, what do? They open out. So they open out, so they spread those arms and legs again, and they'd apply the skate to the ice. They'd apply the skate to the ice. That's, of course, our external torque there. And what happens? We get a big increase in moment of inertia. And what happens now? We decrease velocity. We decrease angular velocity, rate of turn. And that is how, because of the law of conservation of angular momentum, that is how people who are rotating control their rotation, either to be faster or slower. They manipulate their mass to or away from the axis of rotation. Okay, pause there. Okay, let's look at factors affecting projectiles, and especially the horizontal displacement that they achieve. So we've got well, I was going to say a long jumper here. Can you tell from my image that is a triple jumper? Look at the distance this fella's leaping. This is certainly triple jump. Now, a couple of things I want to stress here. This is what we'd say, or this is what we describe as the takeoff height being the same as the landing height. In other words, this here is the board, and this here is the pit. I probably should have done it in a sandy colour. And what that means is that our optimal angle of release is in the region of 45 degrees. Now, we sort of present this like it's exactly 45 degrees, or I haven't drawn 45 degrees, but on average, that's what we'd find with projectiles that were landing at the same elevation or altitude, height, as the takeoff altitude, height, elevation. So obviously with this one, with our badminton sort of, I assume this is a smash this guy's doing, he's hitting from here and he's hoping the landing height is here. So it's actually hard to draw because my hand's in the way. So I can't leave that on there, that's ridiculous. So what we've got here is, it's not any better, is it? So what we've got here is we've got less than 45 degrees. It's a shallower hit. We hit more forwards than upwards, one would say. And of course this example, and by the way, there's lots of other situations where this would be the case, but this is a really nice one. We've got the takeoff height below the landing height, and in the landing height this time is on the crash mat of the high jump. So this person, of course, is going to jump at something greater than 45 degrees. Now, think about that as a basketball going into the net. That's going to be much greater. That's going to be really quite a steep trajectory. We might be up at 75, 80 degrees even in those sort of situations. And that's what we mean by angle of release. Now, going further, we also want to think about the speed of release. And of course, this very much relates to Newton's second law. The rate of acceleration is proportional to the force acting. So when we think about speed of release or velocity of release, what we're saying is a greater velocity of release. What it will do is it will increase the outgoing momentum of a projectile. Remember that momentum is a product of both mass times velocity. Momentum, if we were to show its equation, it's mass times velocity. So of course, what we're saying is that the mass is constant in general terms. Think about a javelin, the mass is constant. If we want it to go faster, if we increase its outgoing velocity, we increase its outgoing momentum as a whole. Now, this one's a really interesting one. I'm so sorry. Excuse me. We've got here height of release. I really enjoy this particular topic. So sorry, guys. I'm just bear with me 1 second. Just bear with me 1 second. And then finally, with the height of release, we're just going to answer a question here. Explain how a shot putter maximizes the impact of height of release. So let me get into sort of a appropriate color here. So I'm going to say the putter, that's this athlete here, drives high, their body that is, drives high by rising onto tiptoes, and releasing the shot, that is, and releasing from fingertips. Now, I'm sorry about the shorthand, I'm just going at a bit of pace. From fingertips. Though you might have wondered when you were sort of first coaches, why do you have to hold it in your fingertips? This is why. Above the head. Okay, so that's how they do it. And then I'm just going to take it a little bit further, and I'm going to say here, because I'm going to say because horizontal displacement HD is predetermined at release. Now, what that means, folks, is that if we throw it or put it from higher, and of course it's going to go to here, if we put it from higher there, we're going to get more distance. If I get it up here, it's going to go effectively further. That's what we're talking about there. Sorry about the caginess and quickness of that answer. Now, we're looking at the forces acting on the shot. Now, I want to do a bit of technique work with you here, folks. When you do a weight vector for a shot, you need to make sure it's long. Now, do it with your ruler, please. I'm doing this quick shorthand. You must do this with your ruler. So the weight is big, it's heavy, right? But also, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my my air resistance, that was meant to be pink, my air resistance. When I do this one, I don't want the air resistance to go outside of the shot because it's nice and low. Now, what that's going to mean in combination is if I do my parallelogram, there is my resultant force like that. Now, what does that mean? I'm now going to say weight is dominant force. Weight is the dominant force. For the why is it symmetrical? Because weight is high and air resistance is low, meaning that the flight path does not deviate. Which of course it would do if it had high air resistance. Deviate due to air resistance, to AR. Okay, so it doesn't deviate due to air resistance. Therefore, we get the principle of conservation of momentum. But the other thing I would say is that the R is very close to the W, showing that it's the dominant force. Now, of course, we get the different example here in our shuttlecock. Combine them. Now, what colours did I use for that up there? Hang on a second. Sorry, I know we're rushing. Green for the weight. Okay, so let me do this. Our weight of the shuttle is from the cook, and you want to make it as small as possible. Ideally, let me go in there. Ideally, not outside the shuttle. So there's that one. Now, my pink, which was my air resistance, is massive. And it goes like that. So there's my air resistance, forgive the colour of the label. There's my weight. So, of course, what I'm going to get now is my parallelogram, and my resultant force is there. So, of course, now we get a deviation. We get an asymmetrical path. So what we can say here for our last bit of work of the day, and then we're going to get off really, really quickly. Sorry, folks. What we're going to say, explain why the flight path of the shuttle, that's a mistake, sorry, is asymmetrical. Okay, and I'm going to say air resistance is dominant, and I'm going to say R, resultant force, is very close to AR, almost horizontal really, isn't it? Because the shuttle is traveling, I'm going to put the SC, shuttlecock, is traveling very fast. Okay, so the shuttle is traveling very fast, and there's a tree surge in the background, and has a wide cross-sectional area. Now you might be thinking, well, a shuttlecock doesn't have a wide cross-sectional area. Well, it does, because here's the cork, and then it sort of fans out from there, doesn't it? It's sort of like that. So the whole area is quite wide. Anyway, wide cross-sectional area and lightweight. Okay, the flight path deviates. The flight path deviates, and of course it deviates by becoming, I'll just do it in the shorthand, it becomes shorter than it should be if it was symmetrical. Okay, guys, I'm going to stop quickly there because we've gone too long. Hopefully that's been useful. Well, first half, well, not quite half, but first bit done. Little break. Marta, thoughts, questions?
I have two questions. I don't know. Can I?
Oh yes, I'll just put it there. So microphone is on. Let me put it onto dual.
I might go closer to the microphone.
No, it will hear you fine.
Yeah. Okay. I'll come a little bit closer. Anyway.
Do you want to go on the camera?
So no, it's okay. So I've got two questions from two students. The first one is for the analyze the benefits of glycogen loading and sodium bicarbonate question.
Yeah.
Do you not need to AO1 and to define both?
Yes, you do. And I should have been clear on that. My intent in answering that question the way I did was to show the analyze skill. That was what I was trying to do there. If you notice on the document there, I didn't say whether it was an 8 marker, 15 marker, so I didn't sort of go through the protocol, as it were, for the 8 to the 15 marker. From memory, I want to say that was an 8, but I'd check that because I might be wrong on that one. Yes, you absolutely do. So when you get either an 8 or a 15 marker, your first job is to define terms. Absolutely. I call those the AO1 facts. And if you're interested in that, we have a extended writing frame for AQA levels available directly on the free resources on the platform. Just go to the platform and go to free resources. You can download it. And what we encourage you to do immediately is to get your topic area. In this case, it would be sodium bicarbonate and glycogen loading, and get your facts. Bum. So yeah, absolutely. Does that answer that one?
Yes, I think so. Yes.
Yeah.
And the second question is: can you identify what points would get you AO1, AO2, and AO3 marks in general in a question?
So it depends on the command word. Your AO1 stuff is always going to be what I would refer to as the facts. Facts tend to be definitions, descriptions. That's what we're talking about. We're getting the facts. For example, describing glycogen loading as a 7-day process. For example, saying what you do on day 1, day 7, etc., etc. That's the AO1 facts. The AO2 stuff typically comes from you making the appropriate application of that to the example that's either been provided or that you've chosen. Now, with that one in mind, we strongly recommend that you use what's called the EIO model to get the maximum out of all of your examples. Okay, now the EIO model, again, this is published on the free resource on the platform, go and grab it. But EIO means that when you're trying to get an AO2 mark, what you do is you make an example, you say what the impact of that example and the outcome. Let me give you an example of that. So I'm thinking about, what was it? It was a bicarbonate of soda for it was a 3,000 meter runner, wasn't it? So I would say, so the example is the 3,000 meter runner would benefit. The impact to them is that they would be able to delay obla to a higher intensity of exercise, which means, and the outcome of that would mean they can run at higher intensities aerobically and delay fatigue until maybe the last few meters of the race or something. I'll be able to attack the barriers, as we said in that answer. So that's that. Now, for the AO3, that depends. If the command you've been given is an evaluate command, which is quite common with AQA, you're going to get your AO3 marks for talking about strengths, weaknesses, positives, negatives, fors, against. That's where they're going to come in. That's where you're going to get those. With your analyze questions, the key behavior there is to separate the items into parts and then to explain each part. That's where you're going to get your AO3. So just look out for justify. Justify is more saying because for that AO3. But so yeah, and remember as well, you can get AO3 questions, AO3 commands in non-extended writing. The majority of those marks come from extended writing, but they can come from outside of there as well. So yeah, and guys, on that stuff, I've got a whole blog post and free resources on extended writing in AQA A-level specifically. So I'd really recommend you guys go and have a look at that. That would really serve you well. So hopefully that will answer those questions.
Cool.
Happy with that?
Yeah.
Now, Marta, I think we've got a good 50 minutes to go here. 5-0. That is meant to be. So we'll obviously, it feels like we've only done 3 topics or whatever. We're actually sort of done some of the bigger ones there. We'll make good progress and hang in there. Thank you, and I appreciate it. And let's make that transition and see if we can get you guys off to a cracker on attitudes. Let's start this section by making things a little clearer. What is an attitude? It's a predisposition to act in a particular way towards something or someone. Obviously, you'll have come across the idea of an attitude object. That's what we're referring to as that's something or someone. Behaviour, feelings, and beliefs. Notice, B, A, doesn't start with A. C, ideas, cognitive. That's what we've got here. We've got the affective part. Affective means emotion, by the way. So we've got the emotions we feel about an attitude object. We've got the B, what we actually do towards it, our behaviours. And we've got our thoughts and beliefs, our cognitive aspect. So we've got our ABC model. And of course, we're going to look at sort of manipulating this model. But I just want you to notice that sort of accord, not the car, and disharmony are possible here. Let me think about a child that is worried about learning to swim. Okay, so this is what might happen. They know that drowning is possible, so that's a fact. They know that can happen. Their feelings are they're afraid, but here they're willing to give it a go and give it their best shot, and they've got some incentives to sort of. Do you see how that is a disharmony in the model? If, for example, we had a chord in that model, it would be knowing that drowning is possible, being scared, avoiding swimming. That's where we get a chord. So it's disharmony doesn't necessarily mean bad. Sometimes when we've got a negative attitude like I've just displayed there, we need to create disharmony. I'll come back to that with cognitive dissonance. Now, before we get into all that stuff, I just want to talk to you about cognitive dissonance as a concept, okay? Cognitive dissonance is when we either try and create harmony or disharmony, accord or discord in the model, okay? And how can we do that? We can make the attitude components differ. You just saw me do that. As an example, we would basically cause disruption. One way to think about this is to challenge people. We can challenge people to do things, to think, to feel differently. Causing the components of the attitude to conflict. It sounds negative, doesn't it? This is potentially positive unless the attitude is already positive, in which case we want to just keep it going. We've got here, we've got the cognitive dissonance towards the emotional characteristic. We can change the feeling associated with the object. How do we do that? We simply make the experience fun. We make it fun. How important is that for young children? You've got the idea of that just here. How do we change the behavioural part? We might go towards rewards and incentives. Think about things like trophies. Think about things like trainer, not the shoe, of the week, someone who's trained the hardest. What I like to think about these 2 points, it's where we flip an attitude. Okay, so someone might not be feeling super positive about something, but we can flip that attitude by incentivizing the right behaviors, and then the fun will come out the back of that. Incentives, payment, for example, would be one of those in there. What about if we change the cognitive dissonance? Well, we introduce new information. Of course, we call this PC theory, persuasive communication theory. And a nice way to think about persuasive communication is it is a form of cognitive dissonance acting specifically on the C part of the model, the cognitive part of the model. And finally down here, we've got possible to influence all 3 components. Now, that is absolutely the case. It is possible to influence all 3, but we've got to be cautious. But it's likely to be gradual. A little bit like the principles of training, the principle of overload, we've got to do that progression nice and gradually and steadily. Otherwise, it's going to be confusing. Okay, now with all that sort of said, let's actually get into this. Let's get into the factors affecting... Oh, sorry, can I just summarise something as well? If we're using cognitive dissonance theory, the way you want to think about that is to do this, we want to make something fun. make it enjoyable, provide intrinsic value. For here, we want rewards and incentives. Okay, that's how we make a better behavioural attitude. Here, for the cognitive, we need persuasive communication, and we'll come back to that in a second. That is ultimately what we mean. Communication, that's a long word, isn't it? I still haven't finished it. Persuasive communication, that's how we change the C part. Now, just coming down here, I also want to look at the factors affecting attitude formation. What is it in a person's life that's going to sort of help them construct a particular attitude? Well, first of all, the obvious one is going to be their previous experiences. If you've had lots of positive experiences with an attitude object, you're pretty likely to be near it and want to engage with it again. What about if you've seen others having very positive experience or not? These are called vicarious experiences. And I don't want to take this too much outside of sort of PE and sport, but if your parents are terrified of dogs every time you go to the park, it's pretty likely the child will be, isn't it? We model and we're copying, there's something to be afraid of. That could be the same with movement, going to the gym, sport, healthy eating, whatever. Now then, our parents play a massive impact, or they have a massive impact on the attitudes that we form. It goes without saying, Bandura's social learning model. Our school experience and PE teachers and senior colleagues, beware, it's so important that we get school experience right for people and around movement, health, exercise, lifelong participation, healthy living, healthy eating. These things really matter. It's not just about the school, of course, it's about the home and the parents, of course it is, but it matters. Also, people, especially adolescents, teenagers, yourselves, we find that the peer influence is really significant. Very few teenagers really go against that entirely. One's culture will also make a difference. Consider, for example, that the people taking this session, AQA level, you're all doing the same qualification. I reckon there's a load of footballers, a load of swimmers, a load of athletes, a load of tennis players, a load of badminton players, Probably what we don't have a lot of is, I don't know, we probably don't have a lot of, there'll be some, but we don't have loads of taekwondo fighters or players, for example. There'll be some, but the culture dictates that we go towards certain things, and, maybe that's a good thing and sometimes bad. Religion might have an impact on how we see the world. And finally, and this is something I'm not qualified to describe to you, but trauma, something horrible happens. Let's say, I've used lots of examples of swimming. Let's say a near drowning. That's going to cause trauma for someone and they're going to be scared, aren't they? So that affective emotional part is a classic example. Or if someone goes into a PE lesson and feels humiliated, embarrassed and ashamed for whatever reason, bullying or mockery or whatever it might be, then of course that's going to be quite traumatic and that person's likely to develop negative attitudes. Now, persuasive communication is all, I just want to remind you, it's all about its cognitive dissonance, specifically to the cognitive component. That is what it is. We are trying to create the cognitive component. We're trying to change the beliefs. So how do we do that? We provide a clear message as the persuader. What would that look like? Well, we must use appropriate language, and I don't mean by that we don't use the F word or the S word, and I'm sure you swear all the time, so do I, to be perfectly honest with you, but I'm not going to use it here. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the language that the person will understand. Okay, so if you're persuasively communicating a 7-year-old, it's very different to an 18-year-old, isn't it? You're going to use a different lexicon, a different type of language in that sense. We also want to make our message not too complex. Okay, this comes back to sort of verbal guidance, doesn't it? You want to sort of cue just a handful of points at a time. And you want your point to be not too broad. Okay, making it specific really helps to clarify that message. Now, we can go further with the message being relevant. What we mean here is that it's meaningful to the recipient. The recipient actually is interested in what is being communicated to them. It's also, one way of making a message relevant is having it at the right time. It's well timed. It's not, if you consider that, go back to my swimming example, we've got a young person terrified, shaking on the side of the pool and won't get in. It's probably not the right time to go, you'll be fine, son. It's probably not the right moment. That work probably needed to have been done in advance and say, okay, when you walk into the pool, so I'll be here. We'll go in the water together. We're going to go down the steps. You probably want to get that message across earlier than that, for example. And the other thing is the message has to have the potential to cause improvement. And what I mean by that is that the recipient of the persuasive communication needs to believe in the message. They need to believe that this is relevant enough. Now, the high status one is nice and simple. We're talking about someone, what's happened there? My pen's gone mental. We're talking about someone who is respected, experienced, and I like the word here, someone who's, my pen's still not working. Someone here who's an achiever. Sorry, folks. Someone here is an achiever, respected. and is experienced. And finally, we've got a role model. Think about who this might be. This could be, for example, this could be a parent. Didn't change colour. This could be a coach. This could be a teacher. This could be a respected peer. We've mentioned all these things in social learning previously. This could be a role model. When these things are achieved, then that cognitive element of, let's say, a negative attitude is really likely to change, and that's why persuasive communication is valuable. Okay, I think that's the end of my canvas, is it? Yes. Let's look at a couple of scenarios about changing attitudes. We've got one here. A PE teacher is encouraging male pupils to attend netball practice. Let me just zoom in a little bit, it's a bit small. But, little tykes, but most of the boys refuse. So using the triadic model of attitude to explain how the boys have formed a negative attitude towards netball. So the attitude object is netball. So I'm simply saying the affective component is a person's feelings. Now I probably won't get the mark for this yet, but I'm saying that's the first bit. The boys may feel dislike for netball or may lack confidence in how to play. Okay, so they lack confidence, they feel dislike or they lack confidence in how to play. We're going to link those 2 points together and we're going to put 1 mark for that. The cognitive component is a person's beliefs, so there's a person's beliefs. And the boys may believe that netball is for girls. Okay, so there's a stereotype. We're going to make sunglasses, correct? There's my other point. The behavioural component is how a person actually behaves. So let's circle that. And in this case, the boys are choosing not to attend. So there is my max on that question. In other words, I've gone through each of those 3 components and I've said what they are and how they're represented in those boys. Now, moving forward, explain how the PE teacher could use her knowledge of cognitive dissonance to change the attitude. So we're looking for 4 marks here. The teacher needs to cause an imbalance or what we call a disharmony in the components. So we agree that's probably going to get you a mark, by the way. So some kind of imbalance or disharmony, that sort of introductory point. She might do this by educating the boys to believe that netball is not just for girls, okay? So there's that education. That's obviously all about the cognitive bit. I'll actually put C there for cognitive. That's cognitive dissonance with the cognitive element. The teacher could challenge their belief by showing a video of elite. So we've actually got a lovely example there. We'll connect those together. Once attendance commences, the teacher must make the sessions fun. Okay, so there's that. That's to do obviously with the affective part, the A. Let's get them really enjoying it. And this will disrupt the affective component. Finally, the teacher could affect the behavioural component by introducing rewards. So we've got rewards getting into that B part. And then we've got our last one. Now, I think that answer could be slightly better. What are the rewards, for example? What about how did you make them fun, for example? Now, obviously, there's levels to this, but that would be something that you might want to consider if you've got some ideas getting into your answer. But can you see how the student has clearly answered those questions given the specific command that's requested of them? Okay, let's move things forward. Let's have a look at achievement motivation theory. So just a couple of things here. I just want to be clear. In all people, there is a combination of a need to achieve and a need to avoid failure, which drives behaviour. Okay, so let's just be clear. If we are at a high need to achieve here, this is going to lead to what we call approach behaviours. And that is especially the case if we're also at a low need to avoid failure, which is, effectively being afraid of things. So what would this approach behaviour kind of resemble? I'll put it over here on the right-hand side. What would we find people with a low NAF and a high natch to be like? Well, they would love challenge. They're big fans of challenge, especially things like 50-50 situations. They love competition, so they're competitive. They love risks, taking a 50-50 situation, taking that decisive penalty or shot or whatever it happens to be. These people tend to be, but there's exceptions obviously, but these people tend to be persistent. They tend to show what we call mastery orientation. If this is not a term you've come across, it's the belief that success is inevitable and that failure is an indicator on a pathway to success. Therefore, they are not afraid of failure. In fact, as I just said, they're not afraid of failure because they see failure as information. They value feedback. So this is people with a high natch approach. They value feedback if they're high need to achieve. Also, they accept criticism. And finally, they tend to attribute internally. Now, we're not going to look at attribution theory, are we? No, in this topic, but they tend to attribute internally. And what I mean by that is, if, for example, they lose or something goes wrong, they'll tend to say, okay, well, I didn't do this, this, and this right today, and if I change it, that will be better. That's an internal attribution of blame. I can control that. Now, of course, what we're looking at over here, if someone's a very high need to avoid failure, and let's say that they're a very low need to achieve, they're driven by not failing, they're scared of failing, that would put them in the tendency to avoid failure sort of area here, whereas the TES is a tendency to approach success. So what do these people tend to do? What do they do? Well, we find with these people, they tend to avoid challenge. Okay, so they'll often play weak opposition, or they'll opt out of a big game, a tight game. So also they tend to be non-competitive. Obviously, loads of exceptions to this, but non-competitive might be a way. They tend to avoid risk. Okay, so no 50-50 situation, no situations where the probability of success is sort of balanced. They also tend to give up easily. I feel bad about that point, really, but they don't persist as much, let's say. They might experience, in extreme cases, learned helplessness. Again, if you're not sure what learned helplessness is when someone believes that failure is inevitable. They are afraid of failure. Okay, so exactly the opposite of what we've got to our high need to achieve. They're afraid of failure. Also, they avoid feedback. Moreover, they do not seek criticism, so they avoid criticism, so they will not seek out coaching points. So let me just put avoid in there just to be clear. And finally, they tend to attribute poorly. So when they attribute, what people with a high need to avoid failure and a low natch, what they will do is they will take success and they will attribute it externally. So in other words, they'll go, okay, I won today, and it's because I got lucky, or the opponent had a bad day or whatever. They'll tend to do that. Okay. Whereas if they attribute failure, they'll tend to attribute that internally. Now that sounds positive, doesn't it? But they do it internally and stable. I'm not good enough. I lack the quality to do this. So there's issues there. Now, what we want to do is we want to get this into a skill. That's just a list of characteristics. We want to get this into a skill. We know one characteristic of a natch is likes to take risks. Therefore, they approach 50-50 situations. So in a hockey player choosing to take the final penalty shuffle in a shootout, if they miss, they would still take the final penalty shuffle next time. That is what a need to achieve does, and it's something you can look out for. Now let's take another one. Let's say that someone's displaying mastery orientation. Okay, that was this belief that success is inevitable, and let's just describe it. Let's get it into it. They're going to say believe success is inevitable. That was not meant to beep on my computer. I'm so sorry, folks. Is inevitable, and failure is feedback, and failure is feedback. That's what we mean by a mastery orientation approach. And then what would this person tend to do in a specific scenario? Well, let's go for this one. A rugby player. Okay, so a rugby player demanding the ball, even though they have just missed. I'll just put an easy try. I'm just going to put an easy try. So they've missed a try scoring opportunity. Maybe they dropped the ball on the way to put no grounding it, for example. They didn't ground it properly. But the point I want to make there is that the rugby player is saying, give it to me, despite that previous experience of being a difficult one. Now, other things to do with Natch, we can sort of say definitely they value feedback. So we can say they value feedback. Brilliant. So how might this play out? So what about this? They ask coach for improvements. They go to coach, I want to work on this. Can you help me with it? I want to know what I'm doing wrong. That's what we might expect. So sprinter believes. Oh, sorry, I'm looking in the wrong box. Ignore all of that. I'm going to say here, ask coach. As we've said, they ask the coach to video them and find errors. Okay, and that could be any performer. Obviously, let's say it's a gymnast on a beam, for argument's sake. Okay, they value that feedback, so they get the coach to record them and then to pull out the errors. Now, we also want to be able to perform the same skill when we're thinking about a need to avoid failure type approach. Okay, so let's see if we can do that. What might a need to avoid failure do? Well, they might attribute success success externally. And remember, you can always retrain this in people. If people are doing this, it can be retrained. So what would be an example? So they might suggest they won due to weak field. Okay, so the field being who they're competing against, the weak field. So let's put that into a specific example. So this is what I started writing earlier. Sprinter believes they finished first only because the number one ranked, my tummy, sprinter wasn't not running. So they're saying, well, I won, yeah, but I only won because that number one ranked sprinter wasn't there in the race day. But this is the sort of the rub, though. They ran a personal best. So even though this person ran faster than they've ever ran before, what they're saying is, I won because so-and-so wasn't it. Usain Bolt weren't here, so I won. Now that obviously is attributing success externally when in fact actually it was a really, really good achievement. Now I'm aware of time, so I'll just do one more of these. I'm going to say they avoid challenge, and I'll leave you the last one to choose one for yourself. So I'm going to say that NAFs avoid challenge. So we're going to go for tennis player plays a weak opponent. Okay, that's what they're choosing to do. And I'll just describe it here. I'm going to say there's no real risk. There's no real risk of losing. So no pressure. And you've probably experienced that kind of feeling. So it must be really nice to play down at times and to go and be the best at something. But actually, what's the point? You can already do that. Anyway, I had another one for this last one. I'm just aware of time. I put failure internally, attributed internally. They lost because they're not good enough, and the sprinter slips at the start, and they leading to a poor start. But they blame themselves for failure when actually it was bad luck. You know, that would be an example of what a NAF approach would do. Okay, let's move on. Steiner's model. This is all about cohesion. So what did Steiner tell us? Steiner claims that the actual productivity of any group, of any team, will be a sum of the potential productivity. So what if you were to put all of the potentials together and to sort of say, okay, how good is this? Minus the faulty process. Anything that goes wrong. Okay, anything that goes wrong in the process. So this is what we can get to. Sorry, I'll rephrase that. This is what we can get to, but what we actually achieve is the potential minus the mistakes we make. Just 1 second, please. Sorry, folks, I had a really big splutter there, and I thought it was going to sound disgusting, so I just stopped. Okay, so what are our potential faults? We're going to look at two types. We've got one sort of slightly confusingly called the Ringelmann effect. And what do we mean by this? It's a coordination loss. It's something that goes wrong in the technique or the tactics. And this happens a lot in larger teams. Okay, so the bigger the team, think about a rugby union team, for example, the more likely a coordination Ringelmann effect loss fault is going to occur. And it also happens more with complex skills. And of course, something like rugby with a very high perceptual load in most cases, of course, is a good example of that. So how do we reduce the Ringelmann effect? Well, what we want is we want to provide very clear team and individual goals. And those are probably going to be sort of process or performance goal related individual goals. So it's not just about go out and win today. We want to give those goals nice and clear to both teams and individual. I love this one. Yes, we're going to practice like the competition near transfer, but I love this one. We're going to develop teams within teams. You know, think about the front eight in rugby and the scrum half, for example. Think about the halfbacks. If you're not sure what position I'm talking about, apply the equivalent to your own sport. Think about in netball, the mid-court players, the WA, the WD, and the centre working together, and how they maybe coordinate with the others that play near them, such as the GA and the GD, for example. Those would be sort of teams within teams. That's what we mean. Now, we can also overlearn set plays, let's say free kick routines, corner routines, short corner routines in hockey, whatever. We can select teams where intuition and cohesion is greater. In other words, don't pick the star player if they're not cohesive. A classic here is video analysis to try and get this work done. Video analysis is a bit of a superpower. Video analysis to highlight mistakes so that errors can be eliminated over time. So video is a real superpower in this case because we can minimize the Ringleman effect over time because we can identify errors and improve. And of course, we want to emphasize and reinforce successes. And to be clear, this is coordination successes, not necessarily outcome-based successes. Now, with regards to the social loafing, this is a motivational loss. This is what we would call a lack of effort. A lack of effort. Of course, that is going to cause our potential productivity to go down. We sometimes call this hiding. We often find hiding in bigger groups, okay, or hiding in a crowd. Not literally the crowd, but let's say, for example, you're at a circuit training class and there's 50 people. There's quite easy, isn't it, not to do as much work as you could if there's 3. Can't really get away with it. Okay, how do we reduce this? We set high standards in the whole performance terms, so high effort standards. We set individual goals. We monitor, maybe GPS. We monitor actual output. We use notational analysis. By the way, if you're not sure what notational analysis is, if you were in a basketball game and I was doing notational analysis of you, and one of my boxes here would be number of defensive sprints, and every time you did one, I would tally 1. There's another one. There's another one. There's another one. Right, you're on 5 now. You did 6 across the first quarter. I can do it like that, and I might have that for defensive sprints, attacking sprints, shots, 3-point shots, layups, and I can do that. Beyond this, we can also punish, and I mean in the operant conditioning sense, low motivation. So rather than punishing outcomes, but punish effort or lack of it. And this is a more complex idea, but apply drive reduction theory. Now, we don't do drive reduction theory on this course, but what I will say about drive reduction theory is you need to continuously reset goals. And what that means is, in order for goals to feel both achievable and realistic and relevant and specific, we need to keep moving that sort of bar further and further. That's what we call drive reduction. Because if we just keep the same goal, it'll get boring and achieved after a while. Okay, let's move to here. What have we got here, folks? We've got the idea of explain the possible strategies that coach could use to improve team cohesion. Now, I'm going to put these down as general things. If this question was specifically asking me about loafing or Ringleman, I would write about that. These are general. Right, one way additional to what we said is social activities. Bring the group together and make it social. Make the people like each other, common spirit. Video analysis is a superpower. Get it into your cohesive practices. We also want to be using performance goals rather than outcome goals as much as possible so that we can improve individual elements of performance. Not sure what I've written there. We also want those goals to be clear goals, often individual where possible. And finally, we want to praise. Obviously, that's going to be positive reinforcement. So let's put reward. Praise or reward cohesion, not outcome, but working together. Let's actually drill that and show that as an expectation with the groups that we work with. Okay, let's keep going, shall we? I've sort of felt the need to take a break there, but let's keep it going. Right, first of all, this table at the top is not a bit of work. I just want to stress to you that in 2018, 2021, and then again last year, 2023, we had extended writing which incorporated cognitive and somatic techniques for stress management. So notice that, for example, in 2023, students were asked about cognitive techniques in a 15-mark question related to golf. That becomes interesting. Now, will that question come up again? 24? Probably not, you would expect. But you see the trend here. Extended writing will often involve stress management. So that's something that is really worthwhile you guys getting sort of an aptitude for. Now, we've got a table here which we're going to complete. We've got a basketballer preparing for a cup final there 1 hour before. We've already got PMR, somatic technique. What are they doing? Contracting and relaxing each muscle would help to release any tension built up in the muscles, allowing them to get into the warm-up, gain more physically relaxed and reducing stress levels. This would have a positive impact. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a cognitive one to go alongside that. I'm also going to say visualization. Okay, so imagery, for want of a better term. Okay, so what am I going to say here? I'm going to ask the basketballer, or they themselves are going to picture successful completion of key skills. Okay, completion of key skills. You know, it depends on the player, but this could be 1 versus 1 defending or field goal shooting, whatever it happens to be. But I'm also going to ask them to picture, so it's not just the successful skill, but I'm going to picture and imagine the feeling. So picture and feel the decision to keep sprinting when fatigued. And I want you to think about that, because one of the things that happens in sport is you have to sometimes put it in when you're absolutely knackered, and you can visualize that experience. You can say, okay, I know that's going to happen, and when it happens, I'm going to picture my response, which is to keep going somehow. Therefore, when you come to do it for real, perhaps it's easier in that case. We've got a 100-meter freestyle swimmer on the start block. They're using self-talk. Use it to psych up just before the start. Think about a previous race when they have performed well, such as getting a fast start and an effective tumble turn. This can be used by the swimmer as a positive mantra. I will start the race well, and I am capable of doing this. Also, notice that the side effect of positive self-talk is what we call negative thought stopping, NTS. Negative thought stopping. Now, that isn't the aim of positive self-talk, but if you're thinking positively, it's hard to think negatively because you're actively engaged in the opposite. Now, what am I going to do for my somatic for my swimmer? I want this person on the block, I want them to be operating with breathing control. So doing that physical somatic aspect of this. So we would encourage them, or they can take long, deep breaths. Okay, so that's the protocol. And I'm going to go further. I'm going to chuck a bit of centering in. I'm going to say focusing on the core. So maybe they're focusing in on their diaphragm, that sort of breathing technique work, and they're controlling their breathing. They're aware of it, and it will bring a sense of calmness to them. Let's do one more. We've got here a high jumper on their third attempt at height, so they're potentially about to go out of the competition here. And what do we want them to do? Well, we might go for something, just stay with the same colour. They've got mental rehearsal imagery. Picturing themselves successfully clearing the height in their minds can help to boost their confidence and control any negative thoughts, allowing the high jumper to focus on performing the jump. Now, what we're going to go for here, somatic, I'm going to go for centering. You can't really do kind of like measure sweating and things when you're about to do a high jump. So what we're going to do here is we're going to focus. We're going to focus concentration. We're going to focus concentration on the core of the body. On the core of, even just me saying it, even me thinking about it, maybe go all relaxed, on the core of the body. Anyway, not sure why that happened. Now, I'm going to zoom in here. So some lovely examples for you there. I'm going to zoom in here and we're going to have a look at this answer. We've got here, evaluate the use of breathing control and PMR to manage stress for a high diver, basically. Okay, it is stressful up there. Now, well, I'm not going to get too deep into this analysis. It's already marked, so you can see what marks have been picked up for, and obviously learn those points. But there's a couple of things that I do want to draw attention to. The command is evaluate. I just want to go through here. So we've got this point here would be an AO1 point, but I just want to go, it can be used anywhere. So this here is an AO3, it's a strength. Here, ideal for diver to reduce any arousal of the complexity. That is a strength. Filter out irrelevant information noise. That is a strength. A consequence of being in an optimal zone. However, breathing control may be forgotten. So this is a weakness, an AO3 point. And then we go into PMR. So this is quite strong. So this was strength, 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 weakness. There might be others in there. I'm not reading the whole thing. And then we go into PMR. We're describing it. There's our AO1 in there. But we're saying here it's beneficial. This is an AO3 point. It's a strength. Bum, 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 bum. Complete this technique from head to toe. Maybe time consuming. That's a weakness. AO3. A dedicated time for correct completion. That's a weakness. It's an AO3. Can you see? Because I've been asked to evaluate, in this case PMR, in this case breathing control, my whole answer, look at the majority of marks. This one, this one, this one, this one, this one, this one. I'm not saying they're individual marks. This is a leveled answer. But my point is the following. I am spending my time preparing and indeed writing this answer, and I'm doing it thinking about strengths, weaknesses, and presumably, I can't actually remember if there's one, presumably there's a little conclusion down the end. The divers may prefer to focus on specific dive training rather than stress management techniques such as PMR. So the idea here is that I've concluded that at the end as well, but the key point I want to make is I am clearly evaluating. I am getting the strengths and the weaknesses as my main focus in the answer. Yes, I'm describing what these things are, but my job is to get that evaluation in. Okay, just wanted to get that point across. Okay, I think that's the end of my canvas. So pause there. One of the biggest weaknesses of students on the section I'm about to do is they really, really commonly miss the interrelationships, how do you spell that? Relationships, oh my god, between organisations. Okay, now I am really aware that this is probably not the most thrilling thing to learn, but I do want to make sure there's clarity. In fact, I'm going to do so much so that I'm going to make this a bit bigger. So what I want to do here is I want to go metaphor crazy, okay? And what I want to do is I want to introduce you to an environment for sports development, an environment for grassroots participation to come through to excellence. Now, first of all, guys, I'm going to introduce you up to the top here. Me big cloud. Whoops. Me cloud. Not that it's a sad cloud. It's just providing things. It's just nutrition, I suppose. This is going to be representative of UK sport. And I'm going to give you some information about UK sport in a second, but that's what that is. Now, as you can see here, UK sport is raining stuff down. This stuff that it's raining down here, this in essence is national lottery funding. National lottery funding. And I'll come to in a second to exactly where that's going to end up and what it's going to be used for. But that funding is actually kind of interacting with lots of different spaces, and I'll show you why. The first one is that the grass down here, all of like the goodness, the plant life, all this is what we're going to call the grass roots participants. And you can see here, whilst it might take a little bit of a while to trickle down, some of that kind of rain is kind of getting down there, right, for UK sport, but we'll come back to that point in a second. The other thing is that there's bits hitting this house here. This house is being struck by this rain, this filtering down from UK sport. And I want to just give you a bit of clarity on what this house is represented. First of all, my door over here is representing talent ID. So I suppose theoretically the aim of our grassroots participants is to get good at something and get through that door. Could we claim that? Maybe in our metaphor we can. Also, with this little English flag up here, not meaning to be in any way patriotic, but this is what we're going to call the EIS. This here, this little window and this little flag, this is the English Institute of Sport. And by the way, some of these raindrops are so kind of explosive, they drop on the EIS as well. Just show it in the image here. And this window here, folks, go with me, I promise it's going to be worth it. This window here, this is the national governing body of a particular sport here in the house here. Obviously, once talents are identified, English Institute, national governing body, UK sport is part of that. Are kind of the way that this is supported. So let's have a think about that. Notice UK sport is trickling down to grassroots, to national governing bodies, to English Institute, is involved in talent ID. Well, let's see if we can formulate that. What is UK sport? Well, first of all, guys, its first and primary objective is excellence, okay? So it's all about high performance. But part of high performance is getting people to participate in the first place. It's a very strategic organisation, what we mean by that is at the top of the tree, in this case, the cloud, right? It invests, and we can see what it's investing. It's investing national lottery funding. It works with, here we go, it works with national governing bodies. It works alongside them. And what it does here is it makes sure that they're sort of their feet are held to the fire and they do what they meant to do. It also works with the National Institute, the English Institute of Sport in this case. UK Sport works with those. They also work with organisations like the British Olympic Association, more of which in a second. They also work with organisations like Sports Coach UK, which has a lesser role in the UK these days. But UK Sport work with them for a kind of a coaching structure. As you can see already, because they're raining down on this house, they're involved in talent ID, absolutely critical. They also do a lot of work around what we might call sporting relations, and especially international sporting relations. So they're very much kind of like this figurehead, and they do a lot of what you might call a lot of promotion work. So they do a lot of promotion work about sort of UK sport, UK performance. So that's what the UK sport is this top down, very much representing the government view of things. It's raining these resources down. Well, therefore, we've got to ask ourselves, well, what was it kind of raining on, and what's the purpose of this? Well, first of all, we said, actually, or did I say, I might not have, one of the ways that UK sport can rain on me, oh God, where am I going with this, is it can work with individual athletes. It's not as common, but it does have policies. For example, it's got something called the Athlete Performance Award, and that's what our little tree here is representing, the Athlete Performance Award. And this is people, young people with lots and lots of talent, who can be awarded support directly from UK Sport because they've got the resources and the national lottery funding to do it. Meanwhile, this money is filtering down into grassroots participation. Talent is identified, and sometimes it gets through that door of being outstanding. And when that talent becomes outstanding, they may get support from the English Institute of Sport, which is a network of centres all over England. Think the Velodrome in Manchester for cycling. Think about Weymouth for the Water Sports Centre. Think for the Sea Sports Centre. Think about Nottingham for the Water Sports Centre. A series of centres. What do? Well, they provide facilities. They provide so think about a young athlete who's getting, let me go to a darker colour, who's getting facilities, they're getting coaching, they're also getting things like sports science, nutrition, biomechanics, physiotherapy. They're getting lots and lots of performance analysis. And where's all this being paid for, folks? It's being paid from the rain down trickle of UK sport. That performance analysis comes down to them. They might benefit from things like rehabilitation if they're injured, and so on. So these sorts of processes, they're going to also help athletes get sponsorship deals. So athletes, perhaps young athletes coming through as talent identified athletes, they're getting the benefit of all these behaviours. Plus they're getting world-class facilities, world-class science, world-class coaching. Where? At the specific English Institute. Come to one in a second. Now, meanwhile, we don't just have the English Institute supporting this athlete. We've also got our national governing body. Here it is, our national governing body. What are they doing with the funding that they're being allocated? Well, the answer is absolutely loads of stuff, but let me give you a few examples. They work to increase participation. So they take UK sport funding and they work with participants. What else do? They work in coaching awards, so they make sure that there are enough coaches to coach this grassroots down the bottom, and also the elite standard. We're also saying that they have what are called SDOs. SDOs are specific development officers working with specific groups. So specific groups of people can be supported, perhaps underrepresented groups. They also have a series of regional scouts, but most importantly, guys, well, it's not actually true, most importantly, but very importantly, what we've got here is we've got the idea that the national governing body takes these trickle down bits of money and they award them or they fund specific athletes. And those athletes will now come to the final part of this, and we'll go right in here, and we are going to make the roof of our house, I'm not sure about this metaphor anymore, but we're going to make the roof of the house into two. And we're going to say at the top of this, we've got the podium. So think about our talent. It's come through the door, been supported by EIS, funded from the top for you to support. The NGB has supported them, regional scouts, coaches, development officers. So they're going to be people going to the Olympics to get medals. But just below that, we've got something called podium potential. And this is for younger athletes who have the potential to do this journey in the future. And of course, what we now have is a whole network of sport support for athletes at both the grassroots level, talent level, coming through to elite level. And that's how this works. Now, I just want to come back to my original point, guys. My point of all that madness was not to make a massive mess on the screen, which, let's be honest, I've done. But more importantly, I just want to remind you of this principle I mentioned earlier. I said earlier, it's all about the interrelationships, and that's something I want you to ponder. Now, I'm not sure how well I did that, but nevertheless, you've got some key information. Now, just one thing before we leave this behind. I just wanted to give you one example of sort of a policy or a structure. This is through British cycling. It's called Rider Route, and in essence it is the stages of going from a novice into an elite performer. Now, I won't go into details. Click on the link and go and have a look for it yourself, but it works like this. They identify people at the foundation stage. This is people with talent, okay, in cycling, and these people are going to be 14 to 16 typically, years old, that is. So they go from the foundation stage. If they're strong, they will then be carried on to what's called the Olympic development stage, and that Olympic development stage typically supports athletes from the age of 15 to 18. And then what happens is that those athletes would then transition onto exactly what we mentioned above, which is that podium potential stage, that lower part of the roof, and then hopefully they'll make the podium and go and win medals at some Olympics in the future. That's what it is. In other words, this is a talent pathway, and you might want to go and have a look at that as one example. And I think it's nice to think about that, because we're just assuming this appears. No, that appears because the national governing body redirects sport, UK sport funding. It works with the English Institute of Sport at the Velodrome in Manchester and produces this structure. So that intertwined networking of these different organisations. Now let's move things on. I want to talk about social and psychological reasons for performers using pledges. Now we've already got them on the screen there, guys, and in many ways you can just sort of take those at face value. But I just want to give a couple of things. We've got the idea of modern day ethos of win at all costs. Excuse me, win at all costs leads to deviance. That's the key thing I want to say. This is not trying to win. This is saying that winning is so important that I'm willing to cheat, and it causes deviance. Desire for fame and fortune. And the way I like to think about this one is it can overtake or overpower intrinsic value. So most athletes, they get into sport because they have a love for it, they have a passion for it. But sometimes that hunger for success can overtake, and the extrinsic reward can become too powerful, and that's what I'm trying to describe there. A pressure to win from a variety of sources. What could these sources be? The coach and their reputation might be on the line. The fans and their passions might be on the line. One's self and one's own dreams might be on the line. So, of course, people start to take perhaps poor decisions, and that's a social reason why someone might do that. Coaches and family media, what might they do? They may overemphasize winning, okay? Emphasize winning, and that's not good, folks. If people sort of focus on winning as the purpose, value can be lost. Lack of effective methods to ban drugs, and what we'd say here is that the dopers, the cheats, are ahead of the curve. At least they were. I don't think I could confidently say that now. Ahead of the curve, and what we mean by that is that the dopers also have the cheats also have their labs and their scientists, and they're driving that movement forward. Also, athletes feel they can get away with it. Why? Because there's loopholes in the testing regime. There's loopholes in anti-doping. So an example of that, by the way, is state-sponsored drug programs. I don't know if you've come across this, but I don't know if you've come across in the last 10 years Russia and the role of RASADA, which is a Russian anti-doping agency. And if you want to know more about that, get yourself onto Netflix and watch the Icarus, or the Icarus in English, documentary. Okay, it's worth having a look at that to see like literal statewide national doping campaigns. Okay, finally, poor role models in society and sport. The point we're trying to make here is that drug use, let's say paracetamol, aspirin, whatever, is common in society. And one thing you can say is that society is being reflected in sport. We use substances, don't we? Whether that's alcohol, whether that's other things. I'm not going to get too much in the legalisation and policy of drugs, but there you go. There's things to think about there. Now, let's just move down here. We've got psychological reasons for performers taking performance-enhancing drugs. Here I've got vary for different PEDs. So beta blockers calm nerves, for example. So why might someone take them? Well, it could be calming, beta blockers. It could be hyping and arousing, such as stimulants. It could be for aggression. That might have a role from steroids, for example. Steroids can increase aggression. I've got that. The other thing is we could say certain drugs help us to work through pain. Think about narcotic analgesics, where we might even be able to keep playing or compete even if injured. Also, we can recover from injury faster. So that feels like they're physical things, right? But if you step back, they're both psychological reasons, because the determination, the desire to get back from injury is actually a psychological the process is physical, but the desire is psychological. And finally, stimulants can raise self-belief and self-efficacy. And this leads to what we call drive behaviour. In other words, someone will be determined to do this. And it's more common when a person is tired and injured. Okay, so this here, those stimulants could be really positive if someone is at the absolute extremes of their sort of personal commitment. That might be where that comes in. Now, guys, I feel bad about this image because I just can't face at the end of this, whatever it is, hour and a half, reading that out to you. I'm not sure what to do with it, really. What I've tried to do here is in a single image and a load of black text. I've tried to make sure that you have every possible detail about sports legislation that you can. Guys, I don't know what to do other than to say bloody read it and learn it, because you could get questions about performers, officials, coaches, duty of care, spectators and hooliganism. Get that read. What I'm going to do, perhaps, and what I'm going to focus on is we're going to have a little look at this question. In 2003, a rugby player was seriously injured during a collapse scrum. It was argued that the on-match referee had been negligent. And we're going to say define negligence. So let's actually have a go at what that is. The answer's up in the table, by the way, that's above, but we'll just do it from scratch here. I'm just getting into my relevant notes. Sorry, folks. And I'm going to say we would describe it as conduct. I meant to do this in a different colour, but it's conduct below. It's conduct below a reasonable standard. In this case, by the referee. That's what seems to have been found. I don't know the case in question, so I don't know if it's true or not. Reasonable standard. So the conduct of that person below, which can lead to a breach in the duty of care. To a breach in the duty of care. Now that is a really lovely answer to that particularly simple defined negligence question, and can cause harm to people. So there's our definition of negligence: can cause harm to people. Wonderful. We've got our definition there. Super tidy, lovely, fantastic. Now we need to take this further. Discuss the use of sports legislation for officials. We've got the discuss command. So let's have a think about this. I want 3 marks out of this. So let me go for my answer. Let me go for a different colour. I'm going to go for my old traditional black for an exam answer. I'm going to say officials check the player area. Check. Let me just write it out. The playing area. I was trying to speak less here just to get it written down, especially at the end of this. Playing areas to ensure it is safe and to ensure it is, I'm tired, safe, and they also stay up to date. So this is about updating one's own knowledge. They stay up to date. With training on new laws and regulations. With training on new laws and regulations. So I just want to pause there. I've got more to write, but I just want to pause there. What we're saying there is that it's a legal requirement that an official will go and check the playing areas. That keeps them safe. If that's the case, we're going to get a mark for that. Secondly, they stay up to date with training. That's going to be a second. This is how a referee and official is going to go about doing this. And let's go to the other side. However, officials also need protection. Officials also need protection. It's not just about legislation to protect players, for example. They need protection themselves. Okay, otherwise we don't have sport, right? And sports legislation protects them from a claim. So if something goes wrong, they are insured because they followed these behaviours. So what we've got there is we've now got a model where it's not only the referee protecting others, but we've got the protection for the official, okay, and they're protected from a claim. There's my sunglasses, 1, there's my mark. Now it said 3 marks, I've got a little bit more to write. So despite that, let's finish it off. This risk, and the problem with this is this risk of being someone putting a claim against you can deter, or prevent people doing, some officials if protection is not in place. If protection is not in place. Now, I know you just had the mispleasure of watching me write that out, but the point I want to make, guys, in a difficult question, which sort of many of us will avoid this topic to be honest, it's a bit tedious. But what I'm trying to say here is I've looked at my max is actually there, by the way, but I've got my other potential mark here. I'll get rid of that one because I can only get 3, but I've got my 3, even though I've made 4 marks, because I've nice and clearly discussed the different aspects of that. Now, again, I just want to reiterate, guys, I feel a bit bad that I haven't just read this out to you, but it's no good for you, it's no good for me. Get it learned, folks, and look out in the questions for specifically questions about officials, coaches, performers, spectators.
Well, Marta.
Yes.
That's been a biggie. We're over time,
Yes,
big time over
we
time.
are.
Apologies, folks. We tried our best, honestly. We gave it everything there. I think we've just done getting on for 4 hours of delivery. So, whew, yeah. Anyway, Marta, questions or thoughts or requests from these good folk?
I have
before we
one
send them on their way.
question from a student. How does sodium bicarbonate delay ODLA if it only removes the hydrogen ions and not the lactate? Would lactate levels not still increase while hydrogen levels decrease?
Okay, there's actually to answer that question. I mean, I'm going to answer the first question just in terms of how you answer. What was that person's name? Do we know that person?
I don't know.
I'm going to answer it as a direct question, and then I'll answer sort of like how we'd represent it. Okay. So the direct answer to that question is the only fatiguing part of lactic acid is the hydrogen ion, which is positively charged. So what happens in that situation is that the lactic acid splits into lactate and hydrogen ion. That hydrogen is mopped up, we call that, by, let's see if I can do this off the top of my head, HCO3 to form H2CO3, which is called carbonic acid. That carbonic acid immediately separates into one H2O and one CO2. And if you were to balance that equation up, that would balance out chemically speaking, okay? So that's how we get rid of that fatiguing part, so that enzyme denaturing, for you biology students out there, you know the effect of low pH, obviously, on enzymes, things like lipase, PFK, etc. So that is how it does that. But I'm going to interpret your question, because the other answer to your question is, well, why is it not the case that we're measuring blood lactate? Because that is the case. When we do the lactate graph, we measure blood lactate as an indicator of how much hydrogen ion is in there. So you're absolutely right. What would happen in this situation is that the rapid onset of blood lactate accumulation would go above and beyond 4 millimolecules of blood lactate. Why? Because the fatiguing element that was associated with it has been mopped away. So what you'd find is you'd go longer, beyond 4 millimoles before that upkick happens. So I don't know, I'm referring to things we haven't touched on in the session there. I've got videos on that if you're interested, but that's how that actually happens. So yeah. Hope that answers that question. I sort of did it off the top of my head a little bit. But yeah, it's hydrogen ion plus HCO3 goes to H2CO3, splits into one H2O and one CO2. Obviously, they're breathed out as water vapor and CO2. Meanwhile, you're right, lactate, this non-fatigue and potentially useful product, does accumulate because it's the associated. We are removing it as well. But the point is, because we've got not the associated fatigue part, we can go past 4 millimolecules before the upkick in the curve happens, and that rapid onset because of the denaturing occurs. The problem with bicarbonate is it's not an easy thing to digest. It's not an easy thing to take. It will make you feel ill. So it's not. I've sometimes pondered why it's on these courses, because who's going to do that realistically? It's your kidney that makes the bicarbonate ion. Maybe you're someone. Maybe good runners are people who produce lots of it and can manage that chemical balance, that pH balance. Can't think of a good example now. Don't know their body chemistry, but that would be one possible reason why someone's got a higher VO2 max than someone else.
Cool.
Yeah. Cool. Any other questions or thoughts, Marta?
No.
It's 6:15, which basically means it's nearly my bedtime. Guys, I just want to say a massive thank you to you AQA students and teachers. We've had an amazing response to revision, but a little old subject of AQA level B. There's only about 4,500 of you guys doing those exams, and for our last paper 1, there's about 10,000 uses of that video. Now, I'm not saying that's everyone did it 2.5 times. That's not my point, but it just is really positive for us that so many of you have engaged with that, and we'd really genuinely appreciate it. We tried so hard with this revision. I know it's not perfect. My handwriting is dirt at times, and I apologise for that, but I am really trying my best to give people a good opportunity and give them a boost and a bolster going forward for the exams. I'm a big believer that if you put resources in the hands of people when they need them, they will succeed. That sort of sounds a bit like if you build it, they will come. I don't mean it like that, but I think sometimes we overcomplicate education. It's about having the need, the hunger to learn something. And obviously exams will cause that, and it's about putting the right resources in the hands of the right people, and basically people will thrive in that situation. So that's what we're trying to do. There's no rocket science to this. We're just trying to get resources into your hands, and hopefully you guys will use them well and prepare well for your assessments, I suppose. And guys, just final thing from me, I don't know what you're doing next year, obviously university or going into work or apprenticeship or whatever. For those of you that are still undecided or might redirect, can I just say what a brilliant potential pathway sports science, health sciences are for the future. And and I'm not teaching, I'm not in your school, I'm not in your college, but I can also say I really respect people who take A-level PE, and I think it's a course I've taught pretty much my whole career, and it's something that I think we should be really proud of, and we should try and get right, and we should actually push and promote further. So just wanted to pass on from kind of the PE teaching sector. I'm sure all the PE teachers would agree that it's really great that you guys do this at such a high level at A-level, and you do it alongside 2 other qualifications only. And let's hope there's many more cohorts that come through in the future years, because it's a probably good qualification. So anyway, that was a bit of a tearjerker.
Yeah.
Okay, happy, Marta?
Yep.
All right, let's see these guys out. Guys, good luck. Best of. Go get them. Break a leg. Whatever the saying is. Have a great exam. Have a great exam series. Keep yourself balanced. Keep yourself calm. It'll all be fun in the end. And think about the summer. Woo! Have a good one, guys.